The acceptance letter to Oxford University felt heavy in my hands as I stared at the words, full academic scholarship, with a mixture of pride and hollow victory. For years, I had worked tirelessly toward this moment. Perfect grades, debate, team championships, and countless hours volunteering at the local hospital. I should have been celebrating. Instead, all I could think about was the family dinner 2 months ago, when my parents announced they had emptied my college fund to pay for my older sister Diana's extravagant wedding. "She's getting married to Jacob Whitfield, Olivia," my mother had explained, her voice soft but resolute. "This is her special moment. You've always been the practical one. You'll find a way." Little did they know just how practical I would become, or how completely their decision would transform our family forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I sat cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by the soft glow of fairy lights strung across my room. Outside, rain tapped against my window, matching the rhythm of my fingers on my laptop keyboard, as I scrolled through Oxford University's financial portal. Even with the prestigious academic scholarship, there remained a $9,000 gap per year that needed to be filled. Money that should have been covered by my education fund. The education fund my grandparents had established when I was born. The education fund my parents had proudly showed me statements for throughout my childhood, emphasizing how it would open doors for my future. The education fund they had emptied 8 weeks ago to pay for Diana's wedding at Harrington Manor, with its marble fountains and Michelin-starred catering. Through my open window, I could hear my mother on the phone in the garden, her voice rising, with excitement as she discussed the final details of Diana's wedding with the event planner. "The ice sculpture needs to be larger, don't you think? And the string quartet should play during the entire cocktail hour, not just for 30 minutes. I closed my laptop with a quiet snap and leaned back against my pillows. At 18, I had always been the sensible daughter in our family, the one who never caused trouble, never demanded expensive things, never needed rescuing. Diana, at 26, had always been the opposite, passionate, impulsive, and somehow always in need of our parents' financial assistance. Now, her wedding to Jacob, the son of a prominent local businessman, had become my parents' all-consuming focus. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Mia. "Did you get the financial package? Are we going to be roommates or what?" I stared at her message, uncertain how to respond. Mia had also been accepted to Oxford, and we'd been planning to room together since year 10. Her parents, both professors, had diligently saved for her education. Her future was secure. Mine now rested on shaky ground. "Still figuring things out," I texted back. "I'll call you tomorrow." I reached for the framed photograph on my nightstand. Me at 14, holding the National Science Competition trophy, flanked by my beaming parents. "Our little genius," they'd called me that day. The memory felt distant now, as if it belonged to a different family altogether. The sound of the front door opening drew me from my thoughts. My father was home from his architecture firm. His footsteps, usually brisk and energetic, sounded heavy as they moved through the hallway. A soft knock on my door followed. "Olivia, may I come in?" he asked. "It's open," I called, straightening my posture and smoothing my expression into something neutral. My father entered, still in his work suit but with his tie loosened, his salt and pepper, hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired. He always looked tired these days, stretched between the demands of his business and Diana's wedding plans. "Your mother mentioned you received your acceptance package from Oxford," he said, attempting to inject enthusiasm into his voice. "Congratulations, sweetheart. We always knew you could do it." I nodded, waiting. There was more. There was always more. My father perched awkwardly on the edge of my desk chair. "We've been looking at our finances, trying to figure out how to help with the remaining tuition costs." Don't worry about it, I said automatically. I'll take out student loans. Olivia, he sighed, running his hand through his hair. We never intended for this to happen. When we used your education fund for Diana's wedding, we truly believed we could replace it before you needed it. The familiar justification made something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't that they had prioritized Diana. It was that they had done it believing there would be no consequences. That somehow the broken promises wouldn't matter, because things would magically work out. We know it's not fair, my father continued, his voice softer now. But you've always been the smart one, the capable one. Universities were fighting to give you scholarships. The capable one. It wasn't a compliment. It was the reason they felt justified in taking what was mine. Diana's meeting with the florist tomorrow, my father said, his eyes brightening with forced optimism. They're discussing final arrangements for the centerpieces. She's thinking of incorporating your favorite flowers, sunflowers, as a special touch to include you in the celebration. I looked at him, this man who had raised me, who had once protected me, who now saw me as the child who needed less protection because I could fend for myself. That's thoughtful, I said, my voice hollow. I hope the arrangements turn out beautifully. They will, my father said with the same certainty he'd had about all of Diana's endeavors. And after the wedding, we'll focus on making this right for you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My father took my silence for acceptance, perhaps even forgiveness. He squeezed my shoulder before standing. Get some rest, Olivia. We'll figure this out together. After he left, I sat in the quiet of my room, listening to the rain grow heavier outside. The acceptance letter still lay on my bed, a testament to years of hard work and a reminder that hard work wasn't always enough when the playing field wasn't level. I reached for my laptop again, opening a browser and typing, "How to apply for student finance without parental information." As the search results populated, I made a silent promise to myself. This would be the last time I depended on my parents for anything. The last time their choices determined my future. The last time I accepted that Diana's needs would always come before mine. I didn't know it then. But that night was the beginning of a transformation. From the accommodating daughter who accepted her role in the family hierarchy, to someone who would forge her own path, regardless of the obstacles placed in her way. Someone who would learn that strength wasn't about enduring unfairness. It was about refusing to accept it. 3 weeks after receiving my Oxford acceptance letter, I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by student loan applications. The house was quiet. My parents were at Diana's wedding venue, reviewing the final seating arrangements and menu options. For cohesion, my mother had explained. I hadn't asked to join them. I knew my place. My laptop pinged with a new email notification. I clicked to open it. Dear Olivia Bennett, we are pleased to confirm your housing assignment for the Michaelmas term with your requested roommate, Mia Chen. To secure your placement, please submit the $1,800 housing deposit by May 20th. I stared at the screen. May 20th was just 2 weeks away. The student loans I'd been researching wouldn't be processed that quickly. I had exactly $625 in my savings account, money from my weekend job at Blackwell's bookshop where I'd worked since year 11. My phone rang, displaying Mia's photo on the screen. Did you get the housing email? She asked, excitement bubbling in her voice. We got paired together. I'm already planning our room decor. I'm thinking fairy lights above the beds, maybe a vintage map of Oxford for the wall, and Mia, I interrupted. I might not be able to go. Silence followed, then. What are you talking about? You got the scholarship, right? The scholarship covers most of the tuition, but not all of it. There's still housing, books, the meal plan. My voice trailed off. But your education fund? The one your grandparents set up? Your parents said it had nearly £50,000 in it. I took a deep breath. It's gone, Gone? Mia's voice rose in disbelief. How can it be gone? My parents gave it to Diana for her wedding, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, but bitterness crept in. All of it. Are you serious? That was your money. The outrage in her voice mirrored what I couldn't allow myself to feel. They said she needed it more than me. The perfect Whitfield wedding costs a fortune, apparently. Mia stopped herself. I'm coming over. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 20 minutes later, we sat on the garden swing, the same one we'd spent countless afternoons on since primary school. Mia's dark curls were pulled into a messy bun, her expression fierce as I explained everything. How my parents had emptied the account, their promises that they would replace it after the wedding, the constant refrain that I was the capable one who could figure things out. So basically they punished you for being responsible, Mia said, shaking her head. That's so messed up. They don't see it that way. They think they're being fair by giving Diana extra support because she struggles. More? That's not fair. That's enabling, Mia said bluntly. And it's stealing from you. I'd never let myself think of it as stealing before. In our family, resources went to whoever needed them most. And somehow, Diana always needed them most. Have you told them about the housing deposit? Mia asked. Shook my head. They're at the final wedding venue meeting. Apparently, Diana's having second thoughts about the orchid arrangements. Of course she is. Mia rolled her eyes. You know my parents would help if— No, I said firmly. I'm not taking money from your family. Then what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer. Later that evening, I heard the front door open, followed by animated voices. My parents and Diana had returned from the venue, all talking at once. The lighting in the conservatory is perfect, my mother was saying. And the way they've arranged the head table, you'll be able to see every guest from your seat. I emerged from my room to find Diana twirling in our hallway, her blonde hair catching the light. At 26, she still had the ability to command attention simply by entering a room. Olivia! She exclaimed upon seeing me. You won't believe the cake samples they let us try. I swear the lemon and elderflower was divine. That's wonderful, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. I'm glad it's all coming together. Diana continued chatting about the venue while my mother nodded, encouragingly. My father caught my eye and offered a small smile, which I returned half-heartedly. When Diana paused for breath, I spoke up. Actually, I need to talk to you both about something. I held up the printed housing email. Oxford needs a housing deposit. By May 20th, $1,800. The celebration in the hallway dimmed. My parents exchanged glances. Well, my father started. This investor meeting for my new architectural project is just the beginning. It will take some time before— How much are they investing? I interrupted, looking directly at my father. The firm is putting $200,000 into the Riverside development, he said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. They're taking a significant stake, but— So you have money now, I said quietly. You can replace my education fund. The hallway fell silent. Diana looked uncomfortable, glancing between our parents for support. Olivia, darling, my mother's voice took on the pacifying tone she used when explaining why things couldn't be fair. The investment money isn't for personal use, it's for project development. My education fund wasn't for personal use either, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. It was for my education. You got a scholarship, Diana said defensively. You don't even need— I still need $9,000 per year, I cut her off, plus housing, books, and living expenses. My scholarship doesn't cover everything. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. The business will take time to generate profit. Once it does, of course we'll help you. When? I pressed. Because I need the housing deposit in 2 weeks or I lose my place. We'll figure something out, my mother assured me. The same empty promise I'd heard for months. Like what? I gestured to the paperwork spread across the kitchen table. Because that's what I've been doing all day, trying to figure out how to go into debt for an education that was supposed to be paid for. Olivia, please, my mother implored. This is Diana's special time. The wedding is in 3 weeks. Can't we just focus on that for now and worry about university later? I looked at them, my mother's pleading eyes, my father's uncomfortable stance, Diana's mixture of guilt and defensiveness, and something inside me hardened. No, I said simply. We can't. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. No. A complete sentence, a boundary, the first of many I would learn to draw. The silence that followed my refusal stretched uncomfortably. My parents looked at me, as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. In our family, celebrations for Diana's life events were mandatory, regardless of how they affected others. I think I'll skip dinner, I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. I need to finish these loan applications. Olivia, my father started, but I was already walking back to the kitchen table. I could feel their eyes on me as I sat down and picked up my pen. This wasn't the Olivia they knew, the peacekeeper, the one who went along with family decisions without complaint, the one who understood that Diana's needs came first. After a moment of hushed conversation, I heard the front door open and close. Diana had left, likely upset by the confrontation. My parents retreated to the living room, their voices too low for me to hear. Instead of feeling hurt, I felt strangely liberated. I pulled my laptop closed and opened a new browser tab. If I couldn't depend on my family, I needed alternatives. For the next 3 hours, I researched every possible financial option. Additional scholarships, work-study programs, part-time jobs near Oxford. I created spreadsheets detailing potential income sources, projected expenses, and timelines. By midnight, I had a plan, not a perfect one, but a path forward that depended on no one but myself. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. We missed you at dinner. I've left you a plate in the refrigerator. Love you. I didn't respond. When they returned from the living room, I was still at the kitchen table, surrounded by notes and printouts. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder. Olivia, I know you're upset, she said softly. But you have to understand. I do understand, I interrupted, finally meeting her gaze. I understand perfectly. The next morning I woke before dawn. Sleep had been elusive, my mind too busy calculating figures and weighing options. I dressed quietly in the dim light filtering through my curtains, pulling on jeans and a jumper. As I passed Diana's old bedroom, now converted to a wedding planning headquarters, filled with fabric swatches and glossy bridal magazines, I paused. The door was ajar, and in the soft morning light, I could see the gilt-edged invitation propped. On her dresser, Mr. and Mrs. Edward Bennett request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their daughter Diana. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents weren't just giving Diana my education fund. They were claiming the celebration as their own social triumph, too. At Blackwell's bookshop, I approached my manager, Helen, as soon as she arrived. The shop was still quiet, the rich scent of books and polished wood filling the air before the day's customers arrived. I need more hours, I said without preamble. As many as you can give me. Helen raised an eyebrow, pushing her tortoiseshell glasses higher on her nose. Education fund not covering everything? Something like that. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I can give you 3 additional shifts during the week. And if you're willing to work inventory nights, that's time and a half. I'll take all of it, I said, relief washing through. By the end of my shift, my schedule had nearly doubled. It wouldn't be enough for tuition, but it might cover the housing deposit. A start. When I arrived home, I found an envelope on my bed. Inside was $600 in cash and a note in my father's handwriting. Olivia, for your housing deposit. No strings. Attached. We love you, Dad. I stared at the money, emotions warring within me. Relief. I wouldn't have to work myself to exhaustion before the deadline. Anger. This sudden generosity only came after I'd shown I could manage without them. Suspicion. Where had this money come from when just yesterday they couldn't help? Door opened, and my father stood in the doorway, his expression cautious. "Did you find the envelope?" he asked. I nodded, holding up the cash. "Where did it come from?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I spoke with Diana this morning, explained the situation." Understanding dawned. "So this is from her? From her wedding budget?" "From Diana," my father corrected. "She agreed it was the right thing to do." "After you told her to," I said flatly. My father sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Does it matter? The deposit is partially covered." "It matters," I said quietly. "It matters that it took me refusing to play my usual role for anyone to consider that I deserved what was promised." To me, my father looked genuinely bewildered. "Olivia, we've always supported you." "You've always expected me to support myself," I corrected, while supporting Diana. "There's a difference." I picked up the envelope and extended it toward him. "Tell Diana thank you, but I've already figured out how to cover the deposit." My father's eyes widened. "Don't be proud, Olivia. Just take the money." "It's not about pride," I said. "It's about trust. I don't trust that this money comes without expectations. I don't trust that next week or next month there won't be another crisis where Diana needs it back. That's not fair. Isn't it?" I kept my arm outstretched, the envelope suspended between us like a physical manifestation of the chasm that had opened in our relationship. After a long moment, my father took the envelope. "Keep it for now," I said. "If Diana's wedding goes as planned, she can contribute to my education fund afterward, not just the deposit." My father nodded slowly, a new weariness in his eyes as he regarded me, as if seeing for the first time that his reliable, accommodating daughter had begun transforming into someone altogether different, someone who would no longer accept less than she deserved. The week after I refused Diana's money changed the atmosphere in our house. My parents walked on eggshells around me, unsure how to navigate this new version of their daughter who no longer conformed to their expectations. Diana visited less frequently, slipping out of rooms when I entered, as if my presence made her physically uncomfortable. I focused on my plan. Each day after school, I worked at Blackwell's. Each night, I applied for scholarships and small grants. Each morning, I checked my bank account balance, watching it grow incrementally. On Wednesday, I received an email from Mrs. Reynolds, my advanced mathematics teacher. "Olivia, I'm putting together a list of candidates for the Hawthorne Mathematical Excellence Scholarship. The award is $6,000 per year for students demonstrating exceptional aptitude in mathematics. I'd like to nominate you. Can you stop by my classroom tomorrow to discuss? Mrs. Reynolds." The Hawthorne Scholarship wasn't on any of the lists I'd researched. It was local, under the radar, exactly the kind of opportunity I needed. I replied immediately, confirming I would meet with her. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, another change in the household dynamic, as I'd taken over meal preparation. To free up more of my mother's time for wedding arrangements, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, is this Olivia Bennett?" The voice was female, elderly, with a crisp professionalism that immediately commanded, "Attention. Yes, this is her. Olivia, my name is Margaret Hawthorne. I understand Eleanor Reynolds is nominating you for my scholarship." I nearly dropped the wooden spoon I was holding. "Mrs. Hawthorne, yes, she mentioned it just today. Eleanor has excellent judgment when it comes to students with potential," Mrs. Hawthorne continued. But I prefer to make my own assessments as well. Are you available to meet this Saturday at the Bodleian Library at 10 a.m.? Yes, absolutely, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my excitement. Wonderful. Bring examples of your mathematical work, particularly any innovative approaches you've developed. I'm interested in creativity as much as technical proficiency. After confirming the details, I hung up and leaned against the kitchen counter, allowing myself a moment of hope. $6,000 per year would make a significant dent in my financial gap. My mother entered the kitchen, eyeing the half-prepared meal. Need any help? I've got it, I said, returning to the stove. You've been cooking every night this week, she observed. You don't have to do that. I know, I replied simply. I didn't explain that taking control of household tasks was another way of establishing my independence, of demonstrating both to them and to myself that I could manage on my own. Olivia, my mother hesitated, then continued. Your father and I have been talking. We think you should reconsider Diana's offer. The money is just sitting there. I stirred the pasta sauce, keeping my back to her. I meant what I said. If Diana wants to help, she can contribute to my education fund after the wedding. That's not possible right now. The wedding budget is already stretched to the limit. Then my answer is still no. My mother sighed. This isn't like you, Olivia. You've always been understanding about family matters. I turned to face her. Maybe that's the problem. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. A moment later, my father called out, Olivia, someone here to see you. I turned off the stove and headed to the front door, where I found Mia standing with a folder tucked under her arm. Hey, she said, her expression unusually serious. Can we talk? We retreated to the back garden, away from listening ears. Mia opened the folder and slid a printout toward me. So I was doing some research about your situation, she began, and I found something interesting. The printout was from a legal website outlining custodial accounts for minors. I scanned the highlighted section. When funds are placed in custodial accounts designated for a minor's education, the custodian, typically the parent, has a fiduciary responsibility to manage those funds in the best interest of the minor. Using these funds for purposes other than the minor's benefit may constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. I looked up at Mia, the implications slowly dawning on me. What are you saying? I'm saying, she lowered her voice, that if your grandparents set up that education fund specifically for you, your parents might not have had the legal right to give it to Diana. The possibility sent a shock through me. You think what they did was illegal? I don't know, Mia admitted. It depends on how the account was set up, but it's worth looking into. How would I even do that? My Uncle Richard is a financial advisor, Mia said. He could help you understand what type of account it was and what rights you have. No pressure, but he's willing to meet with you if you want. I stared at the printout, a new awareness dawning. All this time, I'd accepted that my parents had the right to redistribute family money as they saw fit. But what if some of that money was legally mine? What if their decision wasn't just unfair, but improper? When can I meet him? I asked. 2 days later, I sat across from Richard Chen in his downtown office. Unlike my parents, who treated financial matters with vague hand-waving, Richard was precise and straightforward. His office walls displayed his credentials alongside family photos, including one of Mia at her debate team championship, where I stood beside her with matching trophies. Is that why you're here? To tell me to be less difficult? She settled onto my bed with a snort. Please, if you're finally standing up for yourself, I'm here to applaud, not criticize. She fixed me with a shrewd look. Though I would like to know what prompted this evolution. I hesitated. My grandmother had always been my ally, but she was also fiercely protective of family harmony. Would she see my actions as disruptive rather than justified? Did Mum tell you about my education? Fund? I asked carefully. Gran's expression darkened. She mentioned some financial reshuffling, was vague on the details. I took a deep breath and told her everything. The emptied account, the broken promises, Diana's wedding expenses, my discovery about trust funds. As I spoke, my grandmother's face grew increasingly still, a bad sign for anyone who knew her. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Your grandfather and I set up that trust the day you were born," she finally said, her voice tight with controlled anger. 48,000 over 18 years, not for Edward and Sophia to redistribute as they saw fit, not for Diana's wedding, for your education. The confirmation sent a wave of vindication through me. "So, it was a trust fund?" "Of course it was," she said, looking offended. "We're not financial amateurs, Olivia." "Gran," I said slowly. "Do you have the account information? The documentation?" She raised an eyebrow. "I was the backup trustee, Olivia. I have copies of everything." My heart raced. Everything? Every statement? Every contribution? The original paperwork designating me as beneficiary? Her eyes narrowed. "Why do you ask?" I showed her the folder Richard had given me, explaining what I'd learned about trustee responsibilities. Gran read the highlighted sections carefully, her expression hardening. When she looked up, there was a gleam in her eye I recognized from my own reflection. Determination. "Well," she said, closing the folder. "This changes things, doesn't it?" "I'm not sure I want to go legal," I admitted. "They're still my parents." "And you're still their daughter," she replied firmly. "The child they were supposed to protect, not exploit." She reached for my hand. "Information is power, Olivia. You don't have to use it, but you should have it." She stood smoothing her trousers with decisive motions. "I'll bring you the documentation on Monday. In the meantime, focus on your scholarship meeting." At the door, she paused. "One more thing. Your grandfather set aside a separate fund for emergency educational expenses, $12,000 in a private account. It was meant to be a graduation surprise, but I think current circumstances qualify as an emergency." I stared at her, speechless. "The money will be transferred to your account by Wednesday," she continued matter-of-factly. "Don't tell your parents. And Olivia," her expression softened slightly, "I'm proud of you. It takes courage to demand fairness, especially from those who should have offered it freely." After she left, I sat in stunned silence. Then I reopened my notebook and added to the assets page, "Grandparents' documentation of Trust Fund Emergency Education Fund, 12,000 grand support." The inventory had shifted dramatically in my favor. By the time I left for my meeting with Mrs. Hawthorne, I had reorganized my approach entirely. I no longer needed the desperate scholarships, the exhausting work schedule, the precarious loan arrangements. With my grandmother's support and the legal leverage of the trust documentation, I had options I hadn't imagined possible hours earlier. The question was no longer whether I could afford Oxford, but what kind of relationship I wanted with my parents. Going forward, did I force the issue of the misappropriated funds? Did I accept my grandmother's gift and move forward independently? Or did I use my newfound leverage to negotiate a new family dynamic? For the first time since receiving my acceptance letter, I felt the weight of financial panic lift from my shoulders. The path ahead wasn't clear, but it was no longer impossibly steep. As I walked into the Bodleian Library to meet Mrs. Hawthorne, I held my head higher. I wasn't just the practical one anymore. I was practical and empowered. And my parents were about to discover exactly what that meant. The meeting with Margaret Hawthorne was unlike any scholarship interview I'd experienced. Rather than focusing on my achievements or financial need, Mrs. Hawthorne, a retired mathematics professor with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, challenged me with complex problems, watching how I approach them. "It's not the answer that interests me," she explained, as I worked through a particularly difficult equation. but the path you take to reach it. We sat at a polished oak table in a quiet corner of the Bodleian Library, surrounded by centuries of knowledge bound in leather and parchment. The setting itself felt like a promise of the academic future that awaited me, if I could secure it. By the end of our 2-hour session, my hand was cramped from writing equations, but Mrs. Hawthorne seemed pleased. "You have a rare talent, Olivia," she said, collecting my work. "Not just for numbers, but for seeing connections others miss." She tapped the folder containing my solutions. "I'll be in touch by Wednesday." As promised, my grandmother arrived Monday afternoon carrying a locked document case. She shooed away my mother's curious questions about her visit, just bringing Olivia some old photographs for a project, and followed me to my room. Once the door was closed, she placed the case on my desk and entered the combination. "Everything is organized chronologically," she explained, lifting the lid to reveal neatly labeled folders. Account establishment documents are in the red folder. The blue folders contain quarterly statements. The green folder has the tax documents. I lifted the red folder with reverent care. Inside was the original paperwork establishing the trust, dated 2 weeks after my birth. My name was clearly listed as the beneficiary, with my parents as primary trustees and my grandmother as backup. "There's a specific provision," my grandmother pointed out, turning to the third page. "The funds are explicitly designated for the higher education of Olivia Eleanor Bennett and cannot be reallocated to another beneficiary without written consent from both trustees and the backup trustee." "Both trustees?" I repeated. "So Mum and Dad both had to agree? And I would have had to approve any beneficiary change," she confirmed grimly, "which I most certainly did not." I flipped through the quarterly statements, tracking the growth of the account over 18 years. Regular contributions from my grandparents, occasional ones from my parents in the early years, compound interest gradually building the balance. The final statement, dated 6 months ago, showed a balance of $48,432.19. "This folder contains withdrawal records," my grandmother said quietly. The documents told the story clearly. 3 large withdrawals over 6 weeks, emptying the account entirely. Each withdrawal form bore both my parents' signatures, with the stated purpose marked as qualified educational expenses. "But it wasn't for educational expenses," I said, anger rising. "It was for Diana's wedding." "Which makes it not just wrong, but potentially fraudulent," my grandmother replied. She removed a manila envelope from the bottom of the case. "This contains the information for the separate fund your grandfather established. It's an ordinary savings account with you as the beneficiary, so there aren't the same tax implications as the trust. The transfer to your account is already processed," she added, her voice softening. "I checked this morning. I checked my banking app. There it was, $12,000 from Bennett Trust. Gran, I don't know how to thank you." She waved away my gratitude. "Your grandfather and I saved for your education because we believed in your potential. We're simply ensuring our investment reaches its intended recipient." Her eyes gleamed with determination. "Now, what's your plan?" I hesitated. "I'm still not sure. Going legal feels extreme." "Sometimes the threat of action is more effective than action itself," she observed. "You now have evidence of potential financial impropriety. You don't have to use it, but having it changes your position." After my grandmother left, I spent hours reviewing the documents, scanning key pages to create digital copies. With each piece of evidence I processed, my resolve strengthened. The next step was clear. I needed expert advice on how best to use this information. I texted Mia, asking if Richard could meet again. Then I organized the documents into 3 clear categories. Proof of intent. The original trust establishing me as beneficiary proof of misuse. Withdrawal forms marked for educational expenses that went to Diana's wedding. Proof of current financial impact. My Oxford acceptance and costs. That evening, my phone chimed with an email from Mrs. Hawthorne. "Dear Olivia, I am pleased to inform you that the Hawthorne Mathematical Excellence Scholarship Committee has selected you as this year's recipient. The award of $6,000 per year will be renewable for up to 4 years, provided you maintain a 3.5 GPA in your mathematics coursework. Additionally, I have spoken with the mathematics department chair at Oxford University about your unique talents. They have expressed interest in offering you a department-specific research assistantship beginning in your first term, an opportunity typically reserved for upperclassmen. This position would provide an additional $2,500 per term in exchange for 10 hours of work weekly. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss next steps. Warm regards, Margaret Hawthorne, Ph.D. I read the email twice, hardly believing the words. Not only had I received the scholarship, but Mrs. Hawthorne had secured me a position that would provide an additional $5,000 per year. With my grandmother's $12,000, the Hawthorne scholarship, and the potential research assistantship, my financial gap had shrunk dramatically. I no longer needed my parents' cooperation to attend Oxford. I could make it work independently. This realization shifted something fundamental in my approach. I wasn't fighting for survival anymore. I was negotiating from a position of strength. The next morning, I received a text from Richard confirming he could meet Wednesday afternoon. I responded with my gratitude, then focused on preparing the questions I needed answered. What legal options existed regarding the misused trust funds? What potential consequences might my parents face if this became a legal matter? What would a reasonable resolution look like outside of court? How should I approach the conversation with my parents? By Wednesday afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive file containing all relevant documents, a timeline of events, and my list of questions. As I prepared to leave for my meeting with Richard, my mother intercepted me in the hallway. "Where are you going?" she asked, noticing my professional attire and document folder. "I have a meeting about a scholarship," I replied truthfully, if not completely. "You've been very secretive lately," she observed, a note of hurt in her voice. I met her gaze steadily. "I've had to be." Something in my tone must have alarmed her because she reached for my arm. "Olivia, is everything okay? You've been different since we told you about the education fund." I considered my words carefully. The time for placating was over. The time for truth, uncomfortable as it might be, had arrived. I'm becoming the person I need to be to secure my future, since no one else is doing it for me. Her face fell, but I didn't soften my stance. "We'll talk soon," I promised. "All of us. There are some things we need to discuss as a family." As I drove to Richard's office in the car Mia had lent me, I felt a strange calm. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just about financial recourse. It was about truth, accountability, and fairness, concepts that had been notably absent from my family's decision-making where Diana was concerned. For the first time, I had the means to change that dynamic, and I intended to use it. My meeting with Richard proved more illuminating than I'd anticipated. After reviewing the documentation, he looked up with an expression that mixed professional restraint with unmistakable indignation. "This is textbook misappropriation," he said, tapping the withdrawal forms. "A trust has very specific rules about qualified expenses. Wedding expenses for a sibling are explicitly excluded." "What does that mean legally?" I asked. "It means your parents could face penalties for non-qualified withdrawals. Typically a 10% penalty plus income tax on the earnings portion, but more significantly, as trustees who violated the terms of the trust, they could potentially face civil liability for breach of fiduciary duty." "I don't want to sue my parents," I clarified. Richard nodded. "Most of these situations resolve without litigation. Often the demonstration that you understand your rights and have evidence of misconduct is enough to reach a reasonable settlement." I left with a clearer understanding of my position and a strategy for approaching my parents. The conversation needed to happen soon, but I wanted to be methodical, not reactive. When I arrived home, the house was unusually quiet. Typically, my father would be watching television in the living room, my mother preparing dinner. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter: emergency meeting with the wedding venue, caterer issue, leftovers in the fridge. Don't wait up. Mum. I heated some leftovers and settled at the kitchen table with my homework, but found it difficult to concentrate. The empty house amplified the strange limbo I was living in, physically present in my family home, but emotionally detached from the family itself. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Hawthorne. Olivia, the department chair, was quite impressed by your credentials. He'd like to speak with you tomorrow about the research position. Are you available for a video call at 4 p.m.? Another piece falling into place. Another confirmation that I was forging a path forward, with or without my family's support, as I replied. To arrange the call, I heard the front door open. My parents had returned earlier than expected, and from the sound of raised voices, things had not gone well at the emergency meeting. It was time. I took a deep breath, gathered my documents, and prepared to confront the family dynamic that had shaped and almost derailed my future. My parents moved through the foyer, their voices tense and clipped. Diana followed behind them, her face flushed with frustration. I don't understand how they could double-book the conservatory, my mother was saying, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The wedding is in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. They're offering the garden pavilion instead, my father replied, his tone placating. It's actually larger, and the view of the river is— The pavilion wasn't what we agreed to, Diana interrupted. The conservatory has a stained glass ceiling. It's what I've been planning around for 6 months. They hadn't noticed me yet, sitting at the kitchen table with my folder of documents. I remained perfectly still, observing this familiar dynamic. Diana upset, my parents scrambling to fix things, all other priorities suspended in the face of her distress. We can adjust the floral arrangements, my mother suggested, her voice taking on the soothing quality she reserved for Diana's crises. Maybe add some hanging elements to create the same ethereal feeling as the glass ceiling. At what additional cost? My father asked, a rare note of financial concern entering his voice. Diana made a dismissive gesture. Does it matter? This is my wedding day. It needs to be perfect. Of course, darling, my mother assured her. We'll make it work. I cleared my throat, and 3 startled faces turned toward me. Sorry to interrupt, I said, not feeling sorry. At all. But I need to speak with you, all of you. My mother glanced at Diana, then back at me. Olivia, we're in the middle of a wedding emergency. Can this wait until tomorrow? No, I said simply. It can't. Something in my tone must have registered, because my father studied me with sudden wariness. What's this about? I gestured to the chairs around the kitchen table. Please, sit down. This won't take long. Diana rolled her eyes but took a seat, clearly annoyed at the interruption. My parents joined her, exchanging concerned glances. Opened my folder and placed the first document on the table. The original trust agreement with my name clearly listed as the sole beneficiary. 6 months ago, I began, keeping my voice steady, you emptied my education trust fund to pay for Diana's wedding, a fund established specifically for my university education, a fund that I'm now in need of, as Oxford requires the remainder of my tuition and housing deposit. My father shifted uncomfortably. Olivia, we've discussed this. We plan to replace the money after the wedding, I finished for him. Yes, I'm familiar with that promise, but there's something you should know. I placed the next document on the table, the specific provision prohibiting reallocation without consent of all trustees, including my grandmother. The trust had specific terms that were violated when you withdrew the money for purposes other than my education. My mother's face had gone pale as she stared at the document. "Where did you get this?" "Gran is the backup trustee," I explained. "She kept records of everything." Diana leaned forward, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. "What's going on?" "What's going on?" I continued, placing the withdrawal forms on the table. "Is that Mum and Dad took $48,232.19 from my education trust, money legally designated for my university expenses, and used it to pay for your wedding. Which isn't just unfair. It's potentially a breach of fiduciary duty." My father's expression darkened. "Are you threatening us, Olivia?" "I'm stating facts," I corrected him, "and offering an opportunity to make things right before this becomes a legal matter." Diana stared at the forms, then at our parents. "You said the wedding was covered by your savings and a small loan." My mother reached for Diana's hand. "We didn't want you to worry about the finances, sweetheart. We wanted you to have the wedding of your dreams." "At my expense?" I added quietly. The kitchen fell silent as the full implications settled over us. My father was the first to speak, his voice strained. "What exactly are you proposing, Olivia?" I took a deep breath and outlined my terms. Full acknowledgement that the trust funds were improperly used, a signed agreement to repay the entire amount with interest, and a restructuring of family financial priorities to ensure this never happened again. "I need $9,000 transferred to my account immediately for the remaining tuition and housing deposit," I concluded. "The balance can be repaid over time according to a schedule we all agree upon." Diana stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to ruin my wedding because you're jealous." I met her gaze calmly. "I'm trying to secure my education, which is what this money was always intended for." "And if we can't provide $9,000 immediately?" my father asked. "Then I'll have no choice but to pursue other options," I replied, my voice level despite my racing heart. "Gran has already spoken with a solicitor who specializes in trust law." My mother gasped. "You've involved lawyers?" "I've explored my options," I clarified, "just as you explored yours when you decided to redirect my education fund." My father ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of genuine distress. "Olivia, please understand our position. We're stretched to the limit financially. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Everything is paid for. Deposits are non-refundable. We simply don't have $9,000 available right now." "You should have thought of that before you spent my education fund," I replied, not unkindly but firmly. Diana crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "So you'd rather see my wedding canceled? Is that it? Ruin my special day out of spite?" "No one's canceling anything," my mother interjected, her voice taking on a desperate quality. "We'll figure something out. We always do." I closed my folder and stood. "I've presented my position. I need an answer by Friday. After that, Gran and I have an appointment with her solicitor." As I turned to leave, Diana called after me, her voice thick with emotion. "I never knew the money came from your fund, Olivia. They never told me." I paused, looking back at her. It was the first time she'd shown any recognition that she might be complicit in the unfairness, however unwittingly. "I believe you," I said softly. "But that doesn't change what needs to happen now." I left them in the kitchen, their expressions a mixture of shock, worry, and, in my father's case, a dawning recognition that the daughter they had underestimated was now firmly in control of the situation. In my room, my hands finally began to shake, the only outward sign of the turmoil I felt inside. I had done it. After years of acceptance, of quiet compliance, I had drawn a line. There would be no going back to the way things were before. My phone buzzed with a text from Gran. "How did it go?" I replied simply, "They have until Friday to agree to my terms." Her response came quickly. "Stay strong. This is long overdue." Early the next morning, I received a text from Diana asking to meet at the local cafe, neutral territory. I agreed, curious about what she wanted to say away from our parents. The cafe was quiet at 8 a.m., just a few commuters grabbing coffee before work. Diana arrived looking uncharacteristically subdued, her usual polished appearance slightly diminished by dark circles under her eyes. "I couldn't sleep last night," she said as she slid into the booth across from me. "Keep thinking about what you said, about the trust fund." I nodded but remained silent, waiting. "They really never told me where the money came from," she continued, twisting a napkin in her hands. "I just assumed, I don't know what I assumed, that they had it saved or took out a loan." "Would it have mattered?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Did you know it was my education fund?" Diana hesitated, then sighed. "I want to say yes, that I would have refused. But honestly, I was so focused on having the perfect wedding, I might have rationalized it somehow." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I've always been selfish. That way, haven't I?" The admission surprised me. Diana had never been one for self-reflection. "The thing is," she continued, "I can't cancel the wedding. Everything's paid for. People are traveling from overseas. Jacob's family has booked the entire east wing of the hotel." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "But I can do this." She reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "It's not much, just $3,000. It's money I was saving for the honeymoon. Jacob and I can go somewhere less expensive or postpone it entirely." I stared at the envelope, momentarily speechless. "I know it's not enough," Diana added quickly. "But it's a start, right? And after the wedding, when things settle down, I'll help repay the rest. Jacob's firm is giving him a promotion in September. We should be able to contribute $500 monthly." I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. "Why are you doing this?" Diana's expression softened. "Because you're my sister. And because for maybe the first time in my life, I'm seeing clearly how unfair this has been to you." She reached across the table, tentatively touching my hand. "I never meant for my happiness to come at your expense, Olivia. I truly didn't see it that way until last night." I wasn't sure whether to trust this sudden change of heart. Diana had always been quick to show remorse when cornered, only to revert to old patterns once the crisis passed. But the money in the envelope was real, and her offer to continue repayment seemed sincere. "Thank you," I said finally. "This does help." As we left the cafe, Diana paused on the sidewalk. "What will you do about Mum and Dad? About the legal stuff?" "That depends on them," I replied honestly. "I need the rest of the money for Oxford, one way or another." She nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think they're starting to understand what they did wrong. Dad was up all night making phone calls, looking at their finances. I've never seen him so determined." The revelation that my confrontation had already begun shifting family dynamics stayed with me throughout the day. By evening, I would discover just how seismic that shift had become. I returned home that afternoon to find my father waiting in the living room, a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. His reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, and he had the intense concentration I remembered from my childhood, before Diana's constant crises had consumed his attention. "Olivia," he said, looking up as I entered. "Good, you're back. Please, sit down." I approached cautiously, setting my bag aside. The papers appeared to be financial statements, loan documents, and what looked like investment account information. "What's all this?" I asked, taking a seat opposite him. "Our financial reality," he replied, removing his glasses with a tired gesture. "I've spent the day going through everything: our savings, investments, debts, monthly obligations, the complete picture." I waited, sensing there was more. "Diana came to see me after your coffee meeting," he continued. "She showed me the envelope she gave you, told me about her offer to help with repayment after the wedding." It was unexpected, I admitted. For me as well, my father said with a small smile that quickly faded. Olivia, I owe you an apology. A real one, not just words to smooth things over. I studied him, searching for signs of the placating father who had always prioritized peace over fairness. Instead, I saw someone genuinely grappling with his mistakes. When your grandparents established that trust, he continued, I promised to protect it, to ensure it would be there for your education. I broke that promise not just to you, but to them. He gestured to the papers scattered before him, and I've been trying to figure out how to make this right. Have you found a solution? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the hope rising within me. He nodded slowly. I'm selling my share in the architectural partnership. The statement hit me like a physical blow. My father had co-founded Bennett and Harlow Architects 15 years ago. It had been his dream, his passion, his identity. Dad, no. That's your life's work. And you're my daughter, he replied simply. Your education, your future, that should have been the priority all along. He shuffled through the papers, pulling out a document with a signature line. I've already spoken with George. He's agreed to buy me out for a fair price. The paperwork is ready. We just need to finalize it tomorrow. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Enough, he answered. $75,000 total. Some will go toward clearing the wedding debt, but the majority, $48,000 plus interest, will go directly to you. To replace every penny that was taken. I stared at him, unable to fully process what I was hearing. My father was willing to sacrifice his business, his partnership, to make this right. What will you do? After, I mean. A flash of uncertainty crossed his face before he steadied himself. George has offered me a position as a senior architect within the firm. Less autonomy, no ownership stake, but a stable salary. He shrugged lightly. It's actually less pressure in many ways. The front door opened, and my mother entered, arms laden with grocery bags. She paused when she saw us, her expression guarded. You've told her then? She asked my father. He nodded, and she set the bags down, joining us in the living room. The tension in her posture told me this decision hadn't come easily to either of them. Your father and I have been discussing this all day, she said, her voice tight with strain. It's the right thing to do, though I wish. She trailed off, then steeled herself. I wish we had never put you in this position to begin with. I looked between them, these parents who had raised me, who had made a terrible mistake, and who were now willing to make a significant sacrifice to correct it. What about the solicitor? My mother asked. Your grandmother mentioned legal action. That depends, I replied carefully. If we can resolve this properly, there's no need for lawyers. My father nodded, reaching for a legal pad with handwritten notes. I've drafted an agreement. It acknowledges the improper use of your trust fund, outlines the repayment structure, and includes a formal apology. He slid it toward me. Richard Chen, Mia's uncle, has offered to review it pro bono to ensure it protects your interests. I picked up the document, skimming its contents. It was thorough, covering not just the financial aspects, but also explicitly stating that my parents recognized their breach of fiduciary duty. You've spoken to Richard? I asked, surprised. Your grandmother suggested it, my father admitted. She's been quite firm about ensuring this resolution is properly documented. I could almost see Gran standing over them, insisting on proper legal language and binding terms. The thought nearly made me smile despite the seriousness of the moment. There's something else, my mother said, exchanging a glance with my father. About Diana's wedding. My stomach tightened. What about it? We've decided to scale it back, she said, each word clearly difficult for her. The pavilion is actually less expensive than the conservatory. We're canceling the ice sculpture, reducing the floral budget, and switching to a simpler menu. Diana agreed to this? I asked skeptically. Not easily, my father acknowledged with a grimace. But when we explained the full situation, including the fact that I'm selling my share of the firm, she realized the gravity of the circumstances. He hesitated. She may have also received a rather pointed call from your grandmother. That explained Diana's sudden change of heart at the cafe. Gran had always had a way of cutting through nonsense and forcing people to confront their behavior. The reduced wedding expenses, combined with Diana's contribution, will cover your housing deposit, my mother continued. The partnership sale will take care of the tuition. You'll have what you need for Oxford without having to take loans. It was everything I had asked for and more. The resolution addressed not just the financial aspects, but also the underlying issues of fairness and accountability. Yet something still bothered me. Why did it take this? I asked quietly. Why did it take legal threats and documentation and Gran's intervention? Why wasn't I enough? My parents exchanged pained glances. It was my father who finally answered, his voice thick with emotion. Because we lost sight of what matters. We became so accustomed to crisis management with Diana that we began to see her needs as emergencies and yours as flexible. He shook, his head, disgust evident in his expression. We took advantage of your self-sufficiency, your practicality. We failed you as parents, and there's no excuse for that. My mother reached for my hand. We can't undo what we did, Olivia. But we can promise it will never happen again. The balance in this family has been wrong for far too long. I sat with their words, processing this shift in our family dynamic. After years of imbalance, Diana's wants superseding everyone else's needs, they were finally acknowledging the problem and taking concrete steps to correct it. I'll need to discuss this with Gran and Richard, I said finally, to make sure the agreement covers everything necessary. Of course, my father agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. As I stood to leave, my mother called after me. Olivia, thank you for forcing us to face this. It shouldn't have been your responsibility, but I'm grateful you had the courage to stand up for yourself. I nodded, unsure how to respond to this new version of my mother, one who recognized her own failings and my strength in the same breath. In my room, I texted Gran with an update. Dad's selling his partnership. They're repaying everything. Legal agreement drafted. Her response was swift. Don't sign anything until Richard reviews it. Pride comes before a fall, but justice elevates us all. Typical Gran. Biblical wisdom mixed with practical advice. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past weeks beginning to lift. The path forward was becoming clearer, steadier beneath my feet. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I heard raised voices from downstairs. Diana had arrived, and from the sound of it, her acceptance of the scaled-back wedding was being tested. I crept to the top of the stairs, listening. I've already told everyone about the conservatory, Diana was saying, her voice tight with frustration. The invitations show the stained glass ceiling in the background. Then we'll explain that there was an unavoidable change, my father replied, his voice firm in a way I rarely heard him speak to Diana. The pavilion is lovely, and frankly, it's what we can now afford. This is because of Olivia, isn't it? Diana accused. She's punishing me for the trust fund situation. No, my mother said, surprising me with her direct tone. This is because of the choices your father and I made. Choices that were unfair to Olivia, and that we're now correcting. The wedding is still happening, Diana. It will still be beautiful, but some things need to change. I returned to my room before they could discover me eavesdropping, but I carried their words with me. Something fundamental had shifted in our household. The question was whether this change would last beyond the current crisis, or if old patterns would eventually reassert themselves. Only time would tell, but for now, I allowed myself to feel cautiously optimistic about the future, both my academic prospects at Oxford and the possibility of a more balanced family dynamic. The following morning, I awoke to a text from Richard. "Can meet at 2 p.m. to review the agreement. Eleanor will join us." I confirmed the appointment and spent the rest of the morning catching up on schoolwork, trying to maintain some normalcy amidst the family upheaval. Around noon, there was a soft knock at my bedroom door. Diana stood in the hallway, looking uncertain, a rare expression for my usually confident sister. "Can we talk?" she asked, hovering at the threshold like a visitor rather than family. I gestured for her to enter, closing my textbook. Diana perched awkwardly on my desk chair, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. "I spoke with Jacob last night," she began. "About everything. The trust fund, Dad selling his partnership, scaling back the wedding." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "He was upset. Not about the wedding changes. He never cared about the extravagance. But about what happened with your education fund." She looked down at her hands. "He said he couldn't in good conscience start our marriage knowing it came at your expense. This was unexpected. I'd only met Jacob a handful of times, but he'd always struck me as thoughtful, grounded, quite unlike Diana's previous boyfriends." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth. That I didn't know where the money came from initially, but that I'm committed to making it right." She reached into her bag and pulled out a check. "Jacob and I talked about it, and we want to contribute more to your fund. This is $5,000, part of our own savings, not wedding money." I stared at the check, momentarily speechless. "Diana, I don't expect—" "I know you don't," she interrupted. "That's part of the problem. You've never expected fair treatment, and we've all taken advantage of that." She placed the check on my desk with deliberate care. "Jacob said something that really struck me. He said, 'The way your family handles Olivia's education will define your marriage from the start.' He's right." I picked up the check, noting both Diana's and Jacob's signatures. "We're postponing the honeymoon entirely," Diana continued. "We'll take a weekend trip to the Lake District instead and save the money we would have spent on the Mediterranean cruise. That will let us contribute more to your fund after the wedding." Diana sitting before me was almost unrecognizable, reflective, considerate, taking responsibility. Part of me wondered if this change was temporary, a reaction to the crisis that would fade once the immediate pressure lifted. "Why the sudden change of heart?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. Diana sighed, not meeting my eyes. "Gran called me yesterday. She was brutally honest about how I've behaved my entire life, how my wants have always come before your needs, how Mum and Dad have enabled me while expecting you to fend for yourself." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She made me see myself the way others see me. It wasn't flattering. I could imagine Gran's unvarnished assessment. She had never been one to sugarcoat difficult truths, especially with family. "Then, Dad told me he's selling his partnership," Diana continued. "You know how much that firm means to him. It's been his identity for as long as I can remember. That he would give it up." She shook her head. It made me realize how serious this is, how wrong we've all been. "It's not just about the money," I said quietly. "It's about what it represents. The constant message that my future, my needs, were always secondary." Diana nodded, a tear finally escaping to trail down her cheek. "I know, and I'm sorry, Olivia. Truly sorry." She wiped the tear away with an impatient gesture. "I can't promise I'll transform overnight. I've been selfish for 26 years. It's not going to disappear in a day. But I'm trying to be better, to see beyond myself." The apology felt genuine, as did her commitment to change. Whether that change would last remained to be seen, but in that moment, I chose to accept her gesture at face value. Thank you, I said simply. This helps. Diana stood, hesitating before adding, Jacob and I revised our registry last night too. We're asking for contributions to your education fund instead of the crystal and silver we had listed. This final gesture touched me more deeply than I expected. The public acknowledgement of the situation, of their commitment to making things right, spoke volumes about the sincerity of their intentions. After Diana left, I sat holding the check, trying to process this latest development. The family dynamics, that had been set in stone for as long as I could remember, were shifting in ways I hadn't thought possible just days ago. At 2 p.m., I met with Richard and Gran at his downtown office. The space was sleek and professional, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city center. Gran was already seated across from Richard's desk when I arrived, her posture as straight and unyielding as her principal's. There she is, Gran said as I entered, a glint of pride in her eyes. The catalyst of long-overdue change. Richard smiled, gesturing for me to take the seat beside Gran. On his desk lay the agreement my father had drafted, now marked with red annotations. I've reviewed. The document, Richard began, his tone professional but warm. Overall, it's a solid starting point, but I've made some suggested revisions to better protect your interests. For the next hour, we went through the agreement paragraph by paragraph. Richard had tightened the language around repayment terms, added clauses about interest and late payments, and included provisions for what would happen if my parents defaulted. The sale of your father's partnership is a significant step, he noted, but we should still have contingencies in place. Gran nodded approvingly at each strengthened clause. Her involvement throughout this process had been instrumental, not just in providing documentation, but in holding everyone accountable to their commitments. What about Diana's contribution? I asked, showing them the check and explaining the registry change. Richard raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. That's unexpected, but I'm glad to hear it. We should include a section acknowledging these additional contributions, though they don't reduce your parents' obligation to repay the full trust amount. Precisely, Gran agreed. Diana's gesture is commendable, but it doesn't absolve your parents of their responsibility. As Richard finalized the revisions, I turned to Gran. Thank you, I said quietly. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you. She took my hand, her grip still strong despite her age. You've always had this strength in you, Olivia. You just needed permission to use it. She squeezed my fingers gently, and perhaps a bit of documentation to back it up. I smiled at her. Characteristic blend of wisdom and practicality. Do you think things will really change? Or is this just crisis management that will fade once everything settles? Gran considered the question, her eyes sharp with decades of observation. Change isn't an event, it's a process. Your parents and Diana have taken the first steps, but lasting transformation requires consistent effort. She straightened a non-existent wrinkle in her skirt. That's where you come in. By maintaining healthy boundaries, you shape how others treat you. Richard finished his revisions and printed the updated agreement. I'll email this to your father for review, he said, handing me a copy. Once they've agreed to these terms, we can finalize everything. As we left Richard's office, Gran linked her arm through mine. I'm proud of you, Olivia. Not just for standing up for yourself, but for doing it with dignity and reason. You didn't lash out or seek revenge. You sought justice. Her words warmed me. Throughout this ordeal, I had tried to remain focused on resolution rather than retribution, on securing my future rather than punishing past wrongs. There's something else you should know, Gran added as we walked to her car. I spoke with Margaret Hawthorne yesterday. She mentioned that your scholarship reception is next Saturday. I nodded. I received the invitation. It's at Somerville College. I'll be attending, Gran said matter-of-factly. As will your grandfather. We wouldn't miss it. There was a subtle emphasis on we that made me curious. Have Mum and Dad been invited? Gran's expression betrayed nothing. They have. Whether they attend or not will be telling, don't you think? Indeed it would. The Hawthorne Scholarship reception represented my academic achievement, my future at Oxford. Would my parents recognize its importance, or would they be too consumed with Diana's wedding preparations now just 10 days away? When I returned home that evening, I found my father in his study, his desk covered with paperwork. The sale of his partnership stake was clearly progressing. "Richard sent the revised agreement," he said when he saw me. "It's fair, more stringent than my draft, but nothing unreasonable." "Will you sign it?" I asked directly. He nodded without hesitation. "Your mother and I both will, tomorrow morning." I studied him, this man who had always been caught between his daughters, loving both but consistently prioritizing one. Now he was making a significant sacrifice to restore balance, to correct a wrong that should never have occurred. "I received another contribution toward my education fund today," I said, telling him about Diana's check and the revised wedding registry. A complex emotion crossed his face, pride in Diana's gesture perhaps, mixed with sadness that it had taken such extreme circumstances to prompt it. "She's growing up," he said quietly. "Later than she should have, but it's happening." "It is," I agreed. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I added, "Gran mentioned that you and Mum were invited to the Hawthorne Scholarship reception next Saturday." My father looked up sharply. "We are?" "It's at Somerville College, 3 days before Diana's wedding." His expression cleared with understanding. This was a test. Would they carve out time to celebrate my achievement even amidst the wedding frenzy? "We'll be there," he said firmly. "Front row, I promise." I nodded, wanting to believe him but still conscious after years of disappointment. "Thank you." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Olivia, I've been thinking about what you asked the other night, why it took all this for us to listen." He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I don't have a good answer. Only a commitment that it won't happen again. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. An acknowledgement that the patterns of our family needed to change, and a promise to be part of that change moving forward." For the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. The future wasn't perfect, but it was becoming clearer, more secure. Oxford awaited, and my path to get there was no longer obstructed by financial barriers or family inequity. The turning point had arrived, not just for my education, but for our family as a whole. Saturday morning brought unexpected tension to our household. I came downstairs to find my mother on the phone, her voice tense as she paced the kitchen. "What do you mean they won't honor the catering contract?" "We only changed the venue, not the date or guest count." She listened, face tightening. "That's completely unacceptable. We've already paid half the total." I poured myself a cup of tea, trying to remain unobtrusive as my mother's conversation continued to deteriorate. When she finally ended the call, she slumped into a chair, looking exhausted. "Problems with the wedding?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She glanced up, seemingly surprised to find me there. "The caterers are claiming that changing the venue voids our original contract. They want an additional $3,000 to maintain the same menu at the pavilion." She rubbed her temples. "They know we're 10 days out and have no alternatives. Under normal circumstances, this would have triggered an immediate family crisis. My father would have made frantic calls to secure the funds. Diana would have broken down in tears, and all other concerns would have been suspended until the situation was resolved. Instead, my mother straightened her shoulders and said something I never expected to hear. "I'll have to find another caterer. Something simpler, within our adjusted budget." The calm pragmatism in her voice was so unfamiliar that I nearly dropped my mug. This was not the mother who had always indulged Diana's every whim, regardless of cost or consequence. "Do you need help researching alternatives?" I offered somewhat tentatively. She looked at me with surprise, then smiled. a genuine smile that reached her eyes. That would be wonderful, actually. 2 heads are better than 1. For the next hour, we sat at the kitchen table with our laptops, researching local catering options that could accommodate a wedding with 2 weeks' notice. It was perhaps the longest period of practical cooperation I could remember sharing with my mother in years. What about this one? I pointed to a family-owned Italian restaurant that offered catering services. Their reviews are excellent, and they specialize in last-minute events. My mother reviewed their menu and pricing. This could work. It's rustic rather than formal, but that might actually complement the pavilion setting better. She made the call, her tone professional and direct as she explained our situation. When she hung up, there was relief in her expression. They can do it. Same date, similar menu, but with an Italian twist, and at $2,000 less than our original caterer. She shook her head in disbelief. I should have researched options more thoroughly from the beginning instead of just going with the venue's preferred vendor. It's not too late to correct course, I observed, the statement carrying meaning beyond just wedding catering. My mother reached across the table to squeeze my hand. No, it's not. The door opened, and Diana burst in, her expression frantic. Mom, the caterers just called me. They're canceling unless we pay an additional— I know, my mother interrupted calmly. I've already found a replacement. Savana's Italian. They can provide a lovely menu at a significantly lower cost, and their food is superb. Diana blinked, clearly thrown by the lack of panic. But I had my heart set on the champagne risotto. And the truffle-infused. Savana's has a porcini risotto that received regional awards, my mother continued in the same steady tone. And their tiramisu is supposed to be exceptional. But it's not what we planned, Diana protested, though with less force than I expected. My mother stood, her posture firm but not unkind. Plans change, Diana. We're working within new constraints. Now, and frankly, this solution may be better than the original. I watched this exchange in silent amazement. My mother, who had always bent over backward to fulfill Diana's every desire, was now holding firm on practical limitations. Diana's shoulders slumped slightly, but then she drew a deep breath. All right, Italian could work with the pavilions. Rustic charm. Can I see their menu? As my mother handed over her laptop, I slipped out of the kitchen, feeling like I'd witnessed something significant. The family dynamics were shifting in real time, adjustments being made not just to finances but to expectations and communication patterns. Later that morning, as I was preparing for my meeting with Mrs. Hawthorne to discuss the research assistantship, my father knocked on my bedroom door. Olivia, do you have a minute? I opened the door to find him holding an envelope, his expression grave. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, exactly. He gestured toward my desk. May I? I nodded, and he sat down, placing the envelope before him. I've just come from signing the final paperwork for the partnership sale. It's done. Something in his tone made me study him more carefully. Are you having second thoughts? No, he said firmly. It was the right decision. But there's been a complication. He opened the envelope and removed a bank statement. The sale proceeds were meant to be transferred to my account today, but the bank has placed a hold on the funds. My heart sank. Why? Routine security measures for large transfers. They're saying it could take up to 5 business days to clear. He looked up, his expression troubled. Which means I won't have access to the funds until after your Oxford deposit is due. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that had accompanied every financial discussion about my education. So what does that mean for my tuition payment? That's why I wanted to speak with you. He removed a second document from the envelope, a cashier's check made out to Oxford University for exactly $9,000. I borrowed against my pension to cover the immediate payment. It's not ideal, and there will be penalties. But it ensures your place is secured. I stared at the check, emotions washing over me in waves. My father had sold his partnership, borrowed against his retirement, and prioritized my education above all else. The contrast with his previous actions was stark. The trust repayment agreement still stands, he continued. Once the sale proceeds, clear, I'll repay the pension loan and transfer the remaining funds to your education account as agreed. Thank you, I said simply, words inadequate for the magnitude of his actions. He nodded, then hesitated before adding, There's something else. The partnership sale has made its way through the architecture community. I've received some interesting offers. What kind of offers? Teaching positions, guest lectureships, consulting opportunities. A small smile crossed his face. Apparently, my expertise is valued, even without the partnership title. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased for him. It is. He straightened, a new determination in his posture. I've accepted a part-time teaching position at the architectural college. Less money than the partnership, but more flexibility. And perhaps most importantly, a chance to share what I've learned over the years. The transformation in my father was remarkable. In letting go of the partnership that had defined him professionally, he seemed to be discovering new aspects of himself, new possibilities. I think you'll be an excellent teacher, I said. I hope so. He stood, adjusting his glasses. Anyway, I wanted you to know about the check and the bank hold. Everything's still on track for your Oxford plans. As he turned to leave, I couldn't help but ask, How's Diana handling all these wedding changes? My father paused, seeming to consider his answer carefully. Better than I expected. She was upset initially, of course, but she's adapting. Jacob has been a steadying influence. He smiled slightly. And your grandmother's continued advice has been persuasive. I could imagine Gran's unflinching perspective cutting through. Diana's usual dramatics. Sometimes the kindest thing was honest feedback, even when it wasn't what someone wanted to hear. The Hawthorne Scholarship reception is still on our calendar for next Saturday, my father added. Your mother has already arranged for someone to handle the final wedding preparations that day so we can both attend. This concrete evidence of their commitment to honoring my achievement meant more than any words could express. I nodded, unable to fully articulate my appreciation. After my father left, I sat on my bed, the Oxford check on my desk representing far more than just money. It symbolized a fundamental reordering of priorities within our family, a recognition that my education, my future, deserved the same consideration that had always been automatically granted to Diana. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Hawthorne. Looking forward to our meeting today. I've had further conversations with the mathematics department about your research position. Exciting possibilities to discuss. As I prepared to leave, I reflected on how dramatically my situation had changed in just a few weeks. From despair, over losing my education fund, to securing not just the needed finances, but also a prestigious scholarship and research opportunity, all while catalyzing a transformation within my family. There would be more challenges ahead, undoubtedly. Old patterns didn't disappear overnight, and the upcoming wedding would test everyone's commitment to this new equilibrium. But for the first time, I felt genuinely hopeful that lasting change was possible. That I had not just secured my place at Oxford, but also my rightful place within my family. The Hawthorne Scholarship reception was held in the historic dining hall of Somerville College, where generations of brilliant women had studied before me. Gothic arches soared overhead, and portraits of distinguished alumni gazed down from wood-paneled walls. The room buzzed with conversation as recipients and their families mingled with professors and donors. I stood near one of the tall windows, attempting to quell the nervousness that had been building since morning. This wasn't just about receiving a scholarship. It was the first real test of my parents' commitment to their promised changes. Olivia Bennett? A woman in her 60s approached, hand extended. I'm Dr. Collins, Chair of Mathematics. Margaret has told me all about you. We shook hands, and I summoned my most professional demeanor. It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Collins. I'm very much looking forward to starting in the autumn. As are we. Your research assistantship has generated quite a bit of interest in the department. We rarely offer such positions to first years. She smiled warmly. Margaret says your approach to nonlinear equations is particularly innovative. As we discussed the details of the assistantship, I kept glancing toward the entrance. The reception had started 15 minutes ago, and there was still no sign of my parents. Doubt began to creep in. Perhaps Diana had encountered another wedding crisis. Perhaps old patterns were reasserting themselves already. Your family will be joining us? Dr. Collins asked, noticing my distraction. They're supposed to be, I replied, trying to keep disappointment from my voice. My sister's wedding is in a few days, so they're quite busy with preparations. Dr. Collins nodded sympathetically. Family events have a way of consuming all available time and energy. Ah, but perhaps these are your people now? I turned to see Gran and Grandpa entering the hall, elegant in formal attire. Behind them, to my immense relief, were my parents. My mother wore a navy blue dress I'd never seen before, and my father had on his best suit, freshly pressed. We made it, my mother said as they reached me, slightly breathless. The traffic was dreadful, but we wouldn't have missed this. The caterer called with questions about the wedding reception just as we were leaving. My father added, Your mother told them it would have to wait until after your scholarship event. The simple statement that my achievement had taken precedence over Diana's wedding details meant more than they could possibly know. Olivia, you remember Dr. Collins, Gran said smoothly, turning to the professor. Elizabeth was just 2 years behind me at Cambridge. Eleanor Bennett, Dr. Collins exclaimed. My goodness, it's been ages. I should have made the connection with the surname. She turned to me with new interest. Your grandmother was something of a legend in mathematical circles. This was news to me. I knew Gran had studied mathematics, but she rarely spoke of her academic past. Hardly a legend, Gran demurred. Through her eyes sparkled with pleasure. Just stubborn enough to pursue equations when most women were steered toward more suitable subjects. The conversation flowed easily after that, with Dr. Collins sharing stories of Gran's university days while my parents listened with evident pride. Not just in Gran's accomplishments, but in mine, in the academic path I was about to follow. Mrs. Hawthorne joined us, and formal presentations began. When my name was called, I walked to the podium to receive the scholarship certificate. Looking out at the audience, I saw my entire family applauding. Gran with dignified approval, Grandpa with unabashed enthusiasm, and my parents with what appeared to be genuine pride. It was everything I'd ever wanted, recognition of my hard work and family who valued my achievements. The hollow feeling that had plagued me since discovering the emptied education fund began to fade, replaced by something warmer, more hopeful. After the ceremony, as we gathered for photographs, my mother pulled me aside. I've been saving this for the right moment, she said, pressing a small velvet box into my hands. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of an infinity symbol, studded with tiny sapphires. It was my grandmother's, my mother explained. She wore it when she attended university, one of the first women in our family to do so. I thought you should have it now. I ran my fingers over the smooth silver, touched by the gesture and its symbolism. It's beautiful. Thank you. I know a pendant doesn't make up for what happened, she added quietly. But I want you to know that we see you, Olivia. We value your brilliance, your determination. We always have, even when our actions suggest otherwise. I fastened the necklace, the weight of it against my collarbones a reminder of the women in my family who had pursued education against varying odds. The trust fund agreement has been finalized, my father said as he joined us. The bank hold cleared yesterday, and the full amount has been transferred to your education account, plus interest. And we've added something else. my mother continued. A monthly stipend for your living expenses at Oxford. It's separate from the trust repayment, an additional contribution to ensure you can focus on your studies without financial worry. I stared at them, momentarily speechless. The stipend hadn't been part of our negotiated agreement. It was a voluntary extension of support, a tangible demonstration of their changed priorities. That's incredibly generous, I finally managed. Thank you. It's what we should have done from the beginning, my father said simply. As we left the reception, Gran linked her arm through mine. Quite the transformation, wouldn't you say? She murmured, nodding toward my parents walking ahead of us. It does seem genuine, I acknowledged. Do you think it will last? Beyond the immediate crisis, I mean. Gran considered this, her shrewd eyes assessing. People can change when properly motivated. Your parents have had quite the awakening, both, to their own behavior and to your strength. She patted my hand. But lasting change requires vigilance. Boundaries, once established, must be maintained. That's what I'm afraid of, I admitted. That once I'm at Oxford, old patterns will reassert themselves. Then don't let them, Gran said firmly. The distance might actually help. You'll be building your own life, interacting with your family from a position of independence rather than dependence. She smiled slightly. And I'll still be here, keeping an eye on things. Her assurance comforted me. Gran had proven herself a formidable ally throughout this ordeal, and I knew she wouldn't hesitate to intervene if necessary. Later that evening, as I was organizing my scholarship materials, Diana called. I heard the reception went well, she said. Mum was going on about how impressive the mathematics professors are. It was nice, I confirmed, still somewhat guarded in our new, evolving relationship. Everyone was very welcoming. Listen, Diana continued, her voice unusually hesitant. I wanted to ask you something about the wedding. I know it's last minute, but would you consider being one of my bridesmaids? Clarissa came down with mono and had to withdraw, and, well, I'd really like you to be part of the day. The request caught me completely off guard. Diana and I had never been close. Our 7-year age gap and different temperaments had always kept us in separate orbits. That she would want me in her wedding party, even as a replacement, was unexpected. You don't have to answer right away, she added quickly when I didn't immediately respond, and I completely understand if you'd rather not. I know things have been complicated between us. I considered her request. A month ago, I might have seen it as another example of Diana centering herself, making demands on my time and energy. But now, I wondered if it might be an olive branch, an attempt to include me in a meaningful way. I'd be honored, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity behind the words. Though I don't have a dress. We can handle that tomorrow, Diana said, relief evident in her voice. And Olivia? Thank you. Not just for this, but for everything. Really. After we hung up, I sat on my bed, turning the unexpected invitation over in my mind. Being Diana's bridesmaid wasn't something I'd ever anticipated or desired. Yet there was something symbolic about it, about being included rather than sidelined, valued rather than taken for granted. The road to Oxford was now clear before me, the financial obstacles removed, the academic opportunities expanding beyond what I'd initially hoped for. What remained to be seen was whether the rebalancing of our family dynamic would endure beyond this period of crisis and revelation. The bridesmaid invitation suggested it might. So did my parents' attendance at the scholarship reception, their additional financial support, and the subtle but significant shifts in how they spoke to and about me. Change was happening, not just in practical arrangements, but in the underlying assumptions that had governed our family for so long. I was no longer simply the practical one, whose needs could be deferred, whose achievements were expected rather than celebrated. I had claimed my place, and remarkably, my family was adjusting to accommodate this new reality. The process hadn't been easy or comfortable. It had required confrontation, legal documentation, and the unwavering support of allies like Gran and Richard. But the outcome, a family moving, however imperfectly, toward greater fairness and mutual respect, made the difficult journey worthwhile. As I laid out my clothes for the bridesmaid dress fitting the next day, I felt a cautious optimism. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it was substantial. My education was secured, my family relationships were healing, and I was entering a new chapter with clarity and purpose that had seemed impossible just weeks before. The negotiation of financial restitution, of family dynamics, of my own identity within the Bennett household had been exhausting. But the resolution promised a more balanced future, one in which I would no longer need to sacrifice my needs for others' wants. That, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of all. 5 years later, I stood in the Grand Sheldonian Theater, the weight of 2 tassels on my graduation cap, one for my bachelor's degree, one for my master's, a tangible reminder of the journey that had brought me to this moment. The accelerated mathematics program that Mrs. Hawthorne had recommended had been challenging but rewarding, allowing me to complete both degrees in just 5 years. As I scanned the crowd of graduating students, I caught Mia's eye across the sea of black robes. She flashed me a triumphant smile, her own cap adorned with the honors cords she'd earned in her psychology program. We'd remained roommates throughout our time at Oxford, supporting each other through late-night study sessions, research projects, and all the ups and downs of university life. In the audience, I could see my parents and grandparents seated together, their faces shining with pride. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while my father sat tall, his expression one of pure joy. Gran, now approaching 80 but still sharp as ever, nodded approvingly when she caught my gaze. The past 5 years had brought significant changes to our family. My parents had maintained their commitment to our agreement, completing the full repayment of my education fund a year ahead of schedule. More importantly, they had sustained the healthier boundaries and communication patterns we'd established, making our relationship stronger and more authentic than ever before. Diana's path had been more complex. Her marriage to Jacob had started well, but faced challenges when his firm transferred him to Edinburgh 2 years after the wedding. The distance from our parents forced Diana to develop independence she'd never needed before. There were stumbles and difficult moments, but she was gradually learning to stand on her own, an ongoing process that had brought its own form of growth. Surprisingly, it was Mrs. Hawthorne who had become one of my most significant mentors. Her guidance had opened doors I hadn't known existed, including a prestigious research fellowship that would begin next month at Cambridge. "Mathematical talent like yours needs nurturing," she'd said when recommending me for the position, "and proper support." As the commencement ceremony concluded and graduates dispersed to find their families, I felt a sense of completion, not just of my educational journey, but of the personal transformation that had begun that fateful day when I discovered my education fund was gone. Gran reached me first, enfolding me in a fierce hug. "I always knew you were destined for greatness," she whispered, "but watching you grow into your strength has been the privilege of my lifetime." My parents embraced me next, their pride palpable. "We have something for you," my father said, handing me an envelope. Inside was not a check or financial statement this time, but a deed to a small flat near Cambridge University. "For your research fellowship," my mother explained. "We know you'll need a quiet place to focus, and after everything, we wanted to make sure you had a solid foundation, something that belongs entirely to you." The gift left me speechless. It represented not just financial support, but a profound understanding of what security meant to me after the uncertainty I had faced years ago. "This is too much," I finally managed. "It's exactly right," my father countered. It's what we should have done all along. Invested in your future with the same commitment you've shown to creating it. Later that evening, at a celebration dinner, I found myself seated beside Mrs. Hawthorne, who had become not just a mentor, but a friend over the years. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked thoughtfully. "If you hadn't stood up for yourself that day?" I considered the question carefully. Sometimes. I might still have found a way to attend Oxford. I was pretty determined. But I wouldn't have learned what I now know about setting boundaries, about demanding respect, about my own resilience. She nodded approvingly. The greatest education often happens outside the classroom. Diana joined us for dessert, having flown in from Edinburgh specifically for my graduation. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted 5 years ago. Not exactly close, but respectful, with moments of genuine connection. "Cambridge won't know what hit them," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "To my brilliant sister, the one who taught our entire family what strength really looks like." As I looked around the table at the people who had supported me through this journey, my grandparents with their unwavering wisdom, my parents who had learned to see me clearly, Mia whose friendship had never faltered, Mrs. Hawthorne whose mentorship had opened doors I hadn't known existed, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The injustice that had once threatened to derail my future had instead become the catalyst for growth that extended far beyond myself. My parents had been forced to confront their enabling patterns. Diana had begun to develop independence, and I had discovered a strength I might never have known I possessed. What had begun as a desperate fight for what was rightfully mine had evolved into something far more valuable. The creation of a life defined not by what others took from me, but by what I had the courage to claim for myself. As dinner concluded and we prepared to part ways, my grandparents to their countryside home, my parents back to London, Diana to Edinburgh, and me to prepare for Cambridge, my father pulled me aside for a private word. "I never properly thanked you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For forcing us to change." He adjusted his glasses, a gesture I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood. "Selling my partnership was the best thing that ever happened to me, professionally speaking. The teaching position has been more fulfilling than I ever imagined. I would never have made that leap without your intervention." I smiled, remembering the turmoil of those weeks, the fear and determination that had driven me to confront my family's long-standing patterns. Sometimes we need a push to discover where we're really meant to be. "Indeed." He squeezed my shoulder affectionately. "You've grown into an extraordinary woman, Olivia. Your mother and I are so proud of who you've become. Not just your academic achievements, but your character, your clarity of purpose." As we rejoined the others, I felt a sense of peaceful completion. The transformation was complete, not because all wounds were healed or all challenges overcome, but because I now moved through the world as someone who knew her worth and had the courage to stand for it. That evening, as I packed for my move to Cambridge, I came across the silver infinity pendant my mother had given me at the Hawthorne Scholarship reception 5 years earlier. I fastened it around my neck, appreciating its symbolism. The unbroken line connecting past to future, the mathematical representation of endlessness, the legacy of women in my family pursuing education against varying odds. The journey that had begun with a devastating discovery, an emptied education fund and broken promises, had led to a place I couldn't have imagined, not just academic success and financial security, but a profound transformation in how I understood myself and my relationships. I had learned that advocating for yourself isn't selfish, but necessary, that setting boundaries isn't divisive, but clarifying, that demanding fairness isn't disruptive, but healing. These lessons would serve me throughout my life, informing my choices in ways large and small. My grandmother's words from 5 years ago echoed in my mind. "Information is power, Olivia. You don't have to use it, but you should have it. That wisdom had proven true in ways beyond what either of us could have anticipated. The information I'd gathered about the trust fund, about legal rights, about family dynamics, had indeed been powerful. But equally powerful was the self-knowledge I'd gained, the recognition of my own strength, resilience, and worth. As I closed my suitcase, ready for the next chapter at Cambridge, I felt a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with academic achievements or financial stability. It was the confidence of someone who had faced injustice and emerged stronger, who had demanded respect and received it, who had forged a path forward when others would have accepted defeat. The education fund that my grandparents had established was long since spent, funding the Oxford degrees that now hung framed on my wall. But the true education, the one that had transformed me from a compliant daughter who accepted inequality to a woman who stood firmly in her own power, was priceless. And it had begun with a simple, powerful word that I had finally found the courage to say no. No to unfairness, no to being overlooked, no to accepting less than I deserved. That single word had changed everything, rippling outward to transform not just my own life, but my entire family's dynamics. It was a lesson I would carry forward, a foundation upon which to build whatever came next. As I drifted off to sleep on my last night in the Oxford flat I'd shared with Mia for 5 years, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for the education I'd received, but for the journey that had brought me here. The path hadn't been straightforward or easy. It required courage, confrontation, and resilience. But standing on the other side with 2 degrees complete and a prestigious fellowship ahead, I knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth every difficult moment. I had not just secured my education, I had discovered my voice. And that was the most valuable lesson of all. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning at Cambridge, new challenges to face, new boundaries to establish. But I would approach them as someone transformed by adversity into strength. Someone who knew the power of standing up for herself, someone who would never again be defined by others' expectations or limitations. The future stretched before me, full of possibility, not because the path was clear of obstacles, but because I now knew I had the strength to overcome whatever stood in my way. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.